learn early on that being agreeable keeps you safe, that saying yes earns love, that staying quiet keeps the peace. So you become someone who's easy to like, helpful, pleasant, low maintenance. But slowly, almost invisibly, that version of you starts replacing the real one. And without realizing it, you stop being a person and start becoming a performance. Carl Jung saw this long before we had words like people pleaser. He saw it as a soul-level fracture, a split between who we are and who we believe we must be in order to survive. What looks like kindness on the surface is often a mask. And when that mask becomes your identity, something inside you starts to die. You're watching Mind See, where the mind learns to see. You've been taught that being agreeable is a virtue, that being helpful makes you good, that if you keep the peace, others will love and respect you for it. But Jung would have disagreed. He believed that goodness, when it's forced or performative, isn't virtue, it's survival. A mask, a persona. And the longer you wear it, the harder it becomes to take off. Because at some point you forget there was ever a real face underneath. People-pleasing doesn't actually earn you love. It earns you invisibility. You say yes when you want to say no. You stay quiet when something hurts. You make yourself small so others can be comfortable. And at first it works. People like you. They rely on you. But over time, they stop seeing you as a person and start treating you like a function. And that's not because they're cruel, it's because you've trained them to. Every time you swallow your discomfort, you send a message, my needs can wait. Every time you smile through resentment, you tell the world, my feelings aren't important. And every time you go along to get along, your silence gets mistaken for approval. Jung didn't view this as politeness. He saw it for what it is, a coping mechanism, a strategy we develop in childhood to avoid rejection, conflict, or being abandoned. We learn early that showing our real feelings, frustration, anger, sadness, need, can come at a cost. So we hide them. We perform. We wear the version of ourselves that makes others happy. And the more we do it, the more it becomes who we think we are. But that version isn't the real you. It's a shape you've contorted yourself into, one that fits neatly into the expectations of others. And the longer you live that way, the more disconnected you become. Disconnected from your voice, your needs, your identity. And eventually, you start to feel hollow, like something's missing, like you're living someone else's life. This isn't weakness. This is a very real psychological phenomenon Jung called the persona. It's the social mask we develop to adapt to be accepted by family, school, work culture. It's necessary. We all wear masks. You can't go through life blurting out every thought or acting on every impulse. But Jung warned, when you mistake the mask for yourself, you lose your soul. Because the persona is not who you are. It's who you became to survive. You were shaped by what got praised and what got punished. You learned to read the room, to anticipate needs, to smooth over conflict. And in doing so, you lost touch with your own. You became the version of yourself that others liked and abandoned the parts of you that didn't earn applause. And the world rewarded you for it. You got approval, compliments, admiration. But it came at a cost: authenticity. The more you try to please, the more you disappear. Not suddenly, but quietly. You're still there, answering texts, showing up, being reliable. But nobody sees the real you, because you've never shown them. And here's the brutal irony: the people who love you, they're often loving a version of you that doesn't even exist. They love the agreeable you, the helpful you, the version that says yes before even thinking. But they don't know the part of you that's tired, that's frustrated, that wants space, that wants to scream. And when you finally show that part, when you finally say no, people act shocked, upset. They say you've changed, that you're being cold, selfish, difficult. but you haven't changed. You're just showing them what's been buried under the mask this whole time. And the truth is, it's not aggression, it's honesty. It just feels aggressive to people who were benefiting from your silence. This is the moment Jung called individuation. The moment when you stop trying to be what others want and start becoming who you actually are. It's not about self-improvement. It's not about becoming better. It's about becoming whole, reclaiming the parts of yourself you pushed away, your anger, your boundaries, your no. Because you're not here to be agreeable. You're here to be real. You're not here to fit into everyone else's expectations. You're here to write your own story. But you can't do that if your first instinct is to please, to soften, to accommodate, to disappear for the sake of comfort. And that's the trap people pleasers fall into. You think saying yes makes you kind, that staying quiet makes you mature, that putting others first makes you generous. But if you're constantly erasing yourself in the process, is that really kindness, or is it self-abandonment? Jung believed that repression distorts the soul, that when we suppress our instincts, our emotions, our truth, we don't become more peaceful. We become bitter, anxious, disconnected, exhausted. Because you're not just managing your behavior. You're managing everyone else's emotions too. You're anticipating their reactions, softening your words, overthinking every response, not out of care, but out of fear. That's not compassion. That's emotional imprisonment. And the more you do it, the more people expect it. You train them not to expect pushback, not to respect your limits. Because you've shown them, I don't have any. Not because they're bad, but because that's the agreement you signed silently. So now when you say no, it shocks them. When you finally speak up, it sounds like shouting. Not because it's loud, but because your voice has been missing for so long. Jung would say this is where the work begins. This is where the self starts to rise. Not through being liked, but through being honest. Real love, real connection only happens when people see the real you. But most people pleasers never get to experience that. Because they've never risked being fully known. And without realizing it, they've taught everyone around them that easy is their default. That they don't have limits. That they'll always adjust, always smile, always say yes. So when the mask starts to slip, when they finally say, I can't, or I don't want to, or even just not today, it throws people off. And often those people push back. They try to guilt you, to question you, to remind you of who you've always been. But Jung would say let them, because this is the price of awakening. You don't just lose approval, you lose a version of yourself that was never real to begin with. And in its place, something more solid begins to form, something that doesn't need applause to exist. He called it individuation. And it's not about becoming rebellious or difficult, it's about becoming sovereign. Whole. A person with their own boundaries desires instincts and truth. Someone who can love others without losing themselves in the process. But that path, the path of becoming, starts with discomfort. The guilt will come first, not because you've done something wrong, but because you're withdrawing from a lifetime of approval addiction. And withdrawal always hurts. It'll show up in your chest, in your stomach, in your throat, a physical ache that whispers, this isn't safe. You're disappointing someone. You're being selfish, but you're not. You're just finally honoring the parts of yourself you've neglected. And that's not cruelty, it's clarity. Jung didn't believe in avoiding guilt. He believed in feeling it, understanding it, and then choosing truth anyway. Because real growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in the space where guilt no longer controls your behavior. So the first step, recognize the guilt loop for what it is. A sign that you're changing, a sign that you're reclaiming power. And then step 2, redefine your value. People pleasers often tie their worth to one thing: usefulness. If you're helpful, you're good. If you're liked, you're worthy. If you're needed, you feel safe. But this kind of worth is fragile. Because the moment you stop giving, you start fearing. Will they still love me? Jung would say that's not love. That's a transaction. And your value cannot depend on how convenient or agreeable you are. It has to come from something deeper, your presence, your boundaries, your truth. You are not here to be liked. You are here to be whole. Which brings us to the third step. Learn how to disappoint people without apologizing for it. This is one of the most uncomfortable but important muscles to build. Because you will disappoint people when you stop saying yes to everything. You will upset them when you stop softening your boundaries just to keep the peace. But here's the paradox. You can disappoint someone and still be good. You can say no and still be kind. You can choose yourself and still be worthy of love. Because your needs aren't a problem. They're not burdens. They're sacred. And every time you pretend otherwise, you reinforce the lie that your truth is dangerous. Jung believed shadow work, the integration of your repressed parts, was the path to wholeness. And this includes the part of you that's okay with being misunderstood. The part of you that doesn't panic when someone disapproves. The part of you that doesn't shrink or explain or justify every boundary. That's not arrogance. That's emotional maturity. And the fourth step starts small. You don't need to make a dramatic announcement that you're no longer a people pleaser. You don't need to convince anyone that you've changed. In fact, you don't need to prove anything at all. Just start by noticing the moment before you say yes. That flicker of hesitation. That breath you hold. That voice in your gut that says, I don't want to, and honor it. Don't explain every no. Don't over-apologize. Don't rush to fill silences that make others uncomfortable. Let things be a little awkward. Let them be a little messy, because here's what happens. When you stop overgiving, people start recalibrating. They stop assuming. They stop pushing. They stop draining you, not because they've changed, but because you have. When you start showing up with boundaries, the world meets you differently. And that brings us to the fifth step, embody the new standard. People who only loved your compliance might fall away. Let them. That's not loss, that's clarity. Because in their place will come people who respect your truth. People who match your honesty. People who love you for who you actually are, not who you perform to be. But that shift only happens when you hold the line. Not once. Not just when it's easy. But every day in every conversation, especially when that old instinct to please starts creeping back in. That's the real work. Not changing your personality, but refusing to abandon yourself ever again. Jung believed transformation didn't come from outer success or perfection. It came from inner alignment, from the quiet strength of standing in your truth, even when it's hard. It's not about being cold or confrontational. It's about being real. About becoming someone who can be clear in their no-grounded, in their discomfort, and unapologetically whole. By now, something inside you is shifting. You're starting to notice how much of your life has been a performance. How often you've adjusted, softened, or smiled just to keep things smooth. How many times you've said yes, even when your whole body whispered no. And for the first time, maybe you're asking, who am I when I stop pleasing? It's not an easy question. Because it doesn't just challenge your behavior, it shakes the foundation of who you've been trained to be. Carl Jung understood this better than most. When you let go of the persona, when you stop performing for love, what rises isn't someone mean or selfish, it's someone real. Someone who doesn't need approval to feel worthy. Someone who can say no without guilt. Someone who can say yes without fear. Someone who's whole, even if it makes others uncomfortable. That's what individuation really means. Not spiritual fluff. Not chasing perfection. But allowing your raw, honest human self to emerge. So how do you become that person? Let's go step by step. Step 1, recognize the guilt loop. The guilt you feel when you set a boundary isn't always guilt, it's withdrawal. You've been conditioned to feel safe when others are happy with you. So the moment you risk disapproval, your nervous system flares up. You feel like you're doing something wrong just for being honest. But Jung would say, That's not a sign to stop. It's a sign you're healing. You're detoxing from a life built around external validation. You're learning how to be okay without being constantly affirmed. And yes, that's going to feel heavy at first. But that heaviness is progress. It means you're moving. So let the guilt come. Don't try to push it away. Feel it, and still do what's right for you. Step 2. Redefine your value. People pleasers often tie their self-worth to one thing being useful. You feel worthy if you're helping. You feel important if you're needed. You feel secure if you're liked. But this is a trap. Because when your value is tied to how much you give, you start fearing. What if I stop giving? Will anyone stay? That's not love, it's dependency. Jung would say your real value doesn't come from your utility. It comes from your truth, your presence, your ability to take up space without shrinking. You are not valuable because you're easy to be around. You are valuable because you exist, and your boundaries, your voice, your needs are just as real as anyone else's. That's not selfishness. That's self-respect. Step 3. Learn to disappoint people without apologizing. Let this be your next milestone. You can let people down and still be a good person. You can say no without softening it, over-explaining it, or apologizing for it. Because every time you bend your boundary to protect someone else's feelings, you teach yourself that your needs are dangerous. They're not. They're sacred. Jung believed the parts of you that feel too selfish to express are often the parts that were never loved properly. And healing means bringing those parts back home, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. Your truth is not a threat. Your honesty is not a weapon. Your boundary is not an attack. Let people misunderstand you. Let them feel disappointed. Let them think you've changed. Because if their love can't survive your truth, it wasn't love. It was convenience. Step 4, start small, stay solid. You don't need to broadcast your transformation. You don't need to argue with the people who don't get it. You don't need to defend every no. Start small. Pause before you agree. Take space before you respond. Practice silence. Let awkwardness happen. Because the more consistently you show up in your truth, even in quiet ways, the more others will recalibrate around you. You don't need to explain your boundaries for them to be valid. You just need to stand in them, gently, clearly, firmly. And over time, people will stop pushing, not because they've changed, but because you have. Step 5. Embody the new standard. Once you stop people-pleasing, you will start attracting differently. The people who loved your compliance may leave. Let them, because those relationships weren't love. They were built on unspoken contracts. You keep being easy and I'll keep sticking around. When you break that contract, what's real will remain. In their place will come people who see you clearly, love you honestly, and don't need to manipulate you in order to stay close. But that only happens if you embody the new standard, not once, not when it's easy, but over and over in moments of tension and conversations where you used to collapse in choices that ask you to choose yourself first. Every time you honor your truth, you become stronger. Every time you hold your boundary, you gain integrity. Every time you say no without guilt, you reclaim a part of your soul. This is how you stop disappearing. This is how you become whole. You will stop people-pleasing, not because you've become cold, but because you've become conscious. Carl Jung didn't want you to become hard. He wanted you to become awake, to stop editing yourself just to be accepted, to stop bleeding out emotionally for people who wouldn't even hand you a bandage, to stop mistaking compliance for connection. He wanted you to become someone rooted in their no, grounded in their discomfort, unshaken by disapproval. Someone who is fully themselves, even when others don't like it. Because the people who are truly healed, they're not always liked. They're just finally free.